What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Trainwreck Sports Fantasy Podcast. We're coming at you today with a little fantasy football talk, break from the baseball. You get a lot of baseball, not as much football, but that's changing now with football season on the horizon. We're talking receivers today, and I'm joined by Sugar J and Chris. Boys, how are we doing today?
Doing good. What's up, Chris?
Living the dream over here, ready to talk some football. I'm getting excited for the season.
Right, like sometimes I'm doing a show and I'm like, I gotta prep, blah blah blah. Like if it's DDZ or something, and I'm not really feeling anything on the board. I don't like prepping for the show because I'm forcing myself to make picks or whatever. But something like this with the fantasy show, I've been dying to just talk football and get it off my chest. And with the season coming up, we got a bunch of shows coming up, like covering everything. We got you guys, fantasy seasons going in. Hopefully it can lead you guys to some championships. No Wake this week, some family stuff. So I'm filling in as host, and we'll see how that goes. Bear with me there, boys, but I got a good crew with me, so it should go well. First thing we're going to tackle is we're going to be talking about our top 3 overall receivers each this year, because ADP and stuff, when we're talking about that, it seems pretty set who the top 3 guys are, but everyone's got their own opinions. So let's start it off. Jordan, what are your top 3 guys this year, and some reasons why?
So it's been a really interesting year going through the draft. There's a lot of guys at the top with question marks. I only have actually 2 guys that I think are absolute locks to be stars, and that's going to be Tyreek Hill and that's DeAndre Hopkins. Tyreek Hill, I mean, he's not necessarily built like your prototypical wide receiver, but he always produces. That Mahomes machine in Kansas City keeps on trucking. It's safe picks. They've always been great. And then DeAndre Hopkins, this is a guy who's produced with a ton of different quarterbacks. Half of them probably shouldn't have even really been starting in the NFL. So I think you get a lot of insurance there. Even if something happens with Kyler Murray in Arizona, Hopkins is able to produce with backups. If you're looking to draft that wide receiver really early on, he's a safe pick. And then my third guy is Davante Adams. You do have to watch out for the Aaron Rodgers situation a little bit. The more I've kind of thought about the Rodgers situation, the more I've started to feel a little bit better about it, because there's been drama with Rodgers before, and he's come back. He had the whole divorce his family thing. Then he had girlfriend drama. He didn't like the Packers, and he's always kind of come back. And there was the famous relax video that he put out. So I think a lot of the stuff ends up getting worked out. I think Davante Adams is a great quarterback.
Oh, Jordan
with Rodgers.
Oh, there we go.
Are we back now? So even if something happens with Rodgers, okay, cool. Even if something happens with Rodgers, I've been hearing really good reports out of Green Bay surrounding Jordan Love. So I think that there's enough there for Davante Adams to still be a really solid fantasy choice.
Yeah, and so I'll go right into mine there. I hated doing it, but Davante Adams is my number 1 receiver this year. He's just been so consistent at that spot. And you see what he did last year, just so dominant. And he did it in 2 less games than mostly everybody else on the list. 17.4 fantasy points a game. He's just a monster. They didn't do much in the draft. I thought they were going to go receiver in that first round. They didn't, even though they did add a guy in the 3rd round who I like, Amari Rodgers. It's still Lazard, MVS, and then a rookie. It's all up to Davante Adams. And as much as I love calamity in this league, I think Rodgers is just going to be fine. I think he's going to be under center week 1 for them because nothing's happened yet. And then number 2, going Tyreek Hill. I'm sure most people have him in their top 3. He's just an absolute game breaker of a receiver. He's the most prolific receiver in the NFL, biggest playmaker with the best quarterback in the NFL. So it's just easy money there, knowing Tyreek Hill's going to produce for you as long as he stays out of trouble and isn't hurt. PPR, talking strictly here, probably a little less volume than Adams or a Diggs or something. So you might want to watch that, but I still have him as my 2 overall. And then 3rd, you didn't have him, Jordan. Maybe a bit of a homer, but I have Stephon Diggs as my 3rd, staying put where he was last year, finishing out the fantasy season. just the Diggs Allen bromance, it just continues to develop and bloom and blossom, and I love to see it. And that's going to translate on the field. Their first year together was absolutely insane. Do I think Josh Allen takes a step back this year a little bit of regression? Starting to think he might, but not saying he's going to be bad or anything, showing it's just going to be how things play out this year. I don't know. Talking myself into weird scenarios, but Diggs is going to get his targets. He's going to get a ton of catches and a ton of yards, get a few more TDs, and he's solidifying himself as a top 3 guy. And, my number 1 was Davante Adams. Chris, you don't even have Davante Adams in your top 3, do you?
Yeah, I have them at 4, just because when I'm picking in the first round, that question mark of Aaron Rodgers or Jordan Love, we don't know what Jordan Love is, but I would much rather pick a stud volume running back at that point, like Jonathan Taylor, at that draft position than pick Davante Adams with this question mark. Rodgers, he's going to play this year. I do feel like he's going to play this year, but even – it's not that I don't like Davante. It's that I like one other guy that much more, and I guess 3 other guys that much more. So I guess I'll just go into it. You were saying you were a homer. I got Diggs at number 1. The way he runs routes is just poetry in motion on the field. He's the hardest worker I've honestly ever seen in person. I guess not in person, but a lot. So he's just like a stud, and we throw him the ball 150 times. He could probably get 200 targets if he stays healthy the whole season. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but you were talking about touchdowns. He only had 7 last year. If he could put up 10 touchdowns and maintain the same amount of receptions and targets and yards, he's easily going to be the number 1 receiver as he was this last year. So I have at number 2.
I think
now we got Chris frozen.
Uh-oh.
We'll give Chris a second to get situated there. But no, Diggs at 1 isn't crazy. And yeah, he brought the touchdowns too. If Diggs gets those touchdowns up, and I think he can, he's going to continue to blossom. Allen, the Sanders signing doesn't really bother me all that much. But then, so we're going to be talking about through the Bills roster later in the show. But Diggs has the chance to be that top receiver in the league. And here we go. We got Chris back, guys. Let's hear Chris's rest of his top 3.
Did you hear number 2?
Right, you cut out right as you were about to say the name.
Yeah, so I got Tyreek Hill. He was injured a good portion of last year as well and still put up stud numbers. Mahomes is always going to be Mahomes. Mahomes is number 1 receiver. He's an easy slot in for my number 2. And for number 3, I mean, it could easily be Adams, don't get me wrong, but I just wanted to spice things up a bit. I'm put Calvin Ridley up there just because you're losing Julio Jones. They didn't draft a running back. I mean, I think Mike Davis will be the starter, but they're going to throw the ball still. They're not going to stop throwing the ball just because Julio's gone. There's some concern that he's going to get all the top receiver or the top corners now, but I think that he is just like that. So I think that drafting Calvin Ridley, in the second round, so you could pair a stud running back with Calvin Ridley as your wide receiver 1, and I think that's a better option. I just don't personally like taking receivers in the first round. I'm more of a running back guy, but if I had to choose, I would pick a good running back at that mid-round first pick and then circle back, and if I can get Ridley, I'd be elated.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead. I definitely like Ridley. I think if you're going to take him, there's massive, massive upside. I do think you have to be prepared for those weeks where he's going to be prone to being shut down. So I definitely think you want to have some depth at wide receiver. But I definitely think he's going to put up wide receiver 1 numbers pretty frequently. It's just, like you sort of mentioned with him getting lockdown corners, it's just a consistency. And then you guys both had Diggs in your top 4. Maybe it's just growing up during the drought. It's still in disbelief that the Bills are this good.
Yeah. Right.
But I mean, Diggs has always been a good receiver. I don't think he's ever been like that top tier until last season. So for me, Diggs and Allen both, I'm kind of fading them just a little bit because I think they're now being drafted alongside guys that I think have more long-standing pedigree. You know what I mean? Like Josh is being drafted interchangeably with Patrick Mahomes, and I want him to do it. I want him to repeat last season, but
sheltered optimism. That's how I'm going forward.
You know what I'm saying? I think I think Josh is probably the best of the tier 2 guys because I just think Mahomes is God tier. But I'd put Josh above guys like Lamar Jackson, Rodgers, both of them former MVP winners. But those are guys getting drafted 2 rounds later. So with Diggs, I love Diggs. I had him on my team last year, but I got him in like the 7th round. Wow. Now you're going to have to spend a mid-first rounder on him. And if he plays the way he did last year, which absolutely he could, great. But if there's any regression, I'm just like, can I trust this team? You know what I mean?
I think that barring an injury, he's going to be in the top 5. He's going to get the reason he wasn't like a top tier receiver in Minnesota is because they only had him running 3 routes and they give him 90 targets a season. So if in Buffalo they're throwing him the ball, they spent high capital on him, paying him not too much, but they're paying him a decent amount. He's good if he doesn't get injured for 150 targets, and the way he runs routes with Allen's monster arm, it's just he can fit it into those windows. If Diggs can get this much separation, then it's a catch. So that's why I have him at number 1. Barring injury, I'm very comfortable with that.
And going off with Ridley too, I feel like just Ridley isn't much of a household name. Like he wasn't talked about much that last year, and like he had 1,400 yards and 9 touchdowns. Like he would have probably finished as the wide receiver 3 had he not missed a game. He did average more fantasy points per game than Diggs last year, but just ended up playing one less game, and it was close between them. So Ridley with no Julio now. I mean, I love your strategy there, Chris, trying to pair him with a first-round running back in the 2nd round there. I think Ridley has a massive year. But now that we got the top guys out of the way, we're getting to what everybody wants to hear is the sleepers, because this is where we want to tout these guys now, tweet about it now, so that in 6 months, if they're good, we blow it up. We're like, look at how smart I am. And if they're terrible, it just never happened. You never bring it up again. So this is the time to shine, boys. Chris, we'll kick it off to you first. Give us your first sleeper.
I have Darnell Mooney, Chicago Bears. So frequently last year, when I would watch Bears games, which wasn't too often, but I would see the guy get wide open and either Foles or Trubisky overthrow him by a mile. The guy gets open. He just has no one to throw the ball to. Now with Justin Fields there, who I think is going to be a stud, I think he's really going to produce. If something, God forbid, something happens to Allen Robinson, he's going to be a starter every week. We never, bet on injuries or anything, but I think even with Robinson there, if he has somebody who can reliably get him the ball when he gets open, like a Fields, then he's going to outperform his He's being drafted as the wide receiver. He's being drafted at 151. So would you rather have Darnell Mooney or like Jalen Reagor or like Jalen Waddle? You know what I mean? The wide receiver, or T.Y. Hilton, being drafted around him at that point, I think Mooney just stands out like none other. So I think there's a lot of great receivers in the later rounds this year. So that I think he has a great chance to be a reliable starter, or at least a flex option towards the end of the season, or even right away.
Yeah, I don't hate Mooney at all. He had a great rookie year last year, and it's just, depends kind of on that quarterback situation, what's going to happen. I hope it's Fields sooner than later. Sorry to my dude Dalton over there, QB1 as of now, but Mooney's not a bad pick. There's some good receivers in that Chicago Bears room who are very underrated, very slept on in the fantasy world. Jordan, what's your number 1 sleeper?
Yeah, I like Mooney. I sort of talked a little bit last time that I think Chicago's really just a decent quarterback, not even a good quarterback, just a decent away from really exploding. I think Darnell Mooney can be a huge piece of that. Again, Justin Fields doesn't need to be great to make the team great. My sleepers, I got an early one. I don't know if he really counts as a sleeper, but I'm going to go with Michael Thomas as my first pick. because I think he's being slept on, even if he's not necessarily a sleeper. This is a guy who was going top 5 overall in a lot of drafts last year, and he's falling. He's now available in like the 3rd round most of the time. And this is really, I think he's has a legitimate chance to be the number 1 receiver in fantasy this year. You mentioned Jameis last year. A lot of people said, oh, what's he going to be without Drew Brees and whatnot? And I'm like, he wasn't playing with the Drew Brees that was throwing for 5,000 yards every other season. He was playing for late career Drew Brees that was leaning on Kamara a lot. Yeah, okay, sure. He didn't have the most extensive route tree, but the quarterback that they're planning on starting threw for 5,000 yards in his last season as a QB1. I think if you get the 2 running backs and then you get Michael Thomas, I think you have an excellent start to your draft. But a couple true sleepers is there's a couple position groups I really love, and the Vegas Raiders wide receiver room I absolutely want to have a part of. Between Ruggs and John Brown, I think one of these guys is a bona fide wide receiver 2 next year. Just depends how the target share goes about. But both of these guys are available in the double-digit rounds. If you get a wide receiver 2 in the late rounds like that, which is absolutely possible, there's always breakouts like that. I think one of these 2 guys is going to go off this year. Definitely want a piece of that. And then one more pick, I'll get out of the way, is A.J. Green. I know it's a 17-game season now. A.J. Green couldn't stay healthy for a 16-game season. So let's be real. He's not going to be there for the whole season. But there were a ton of question marks throughout the entire course of this draft. Darnell Mooney could break out if Fields is decent. A lot of other stuff. Like I mentioned, Michael Thomas. How's he going to be with Jameis Winston? A lot of changeover in the league. I think A.J. Green gets out of the AFC North, that cold climate. We know he's injury prone, but now he goes to Arizona. He's going to be in warmer climates. It's going to be easier on his body. I think he puts up wide receiver 2 numbers, at least for the first, say, 6 games of the year, until you can figure out what everybody else is going to look like. And then he probably goes to the bench or IR with an injury. But while you're waiting to see how these young rookies, like let's say you're the guy that drafts Najee Harris or Kyle Pitts or something like that, if you're looking for just great performance early on in the season, maybe you get Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith, I think A.J. Green's a great fill-in for early in the season.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there. I feel like there's a lot of situations where guys who were formerly high-profile players, whether they've been dealing with injuries or declining a bit, whatever, but these high-profile guys who are not getting respect in fantasy this year, especially at receiver. So I'm going to, you brought up Green and Thomas. I'm going to bounce right off of that and give you guys a sleeper. I'd asked you guys before, I'm like, is this even a sleeper? But it really is Odell Beckham Jr. this year. Coming off that ACL tear, I mean, Odell has been an absolute threat every single year of his career. 6 of his 8 seasons, he's finished in the top 10 in fantasy points per game. Last year, obviously, tore his ACL. And even though people are like, hey, Baker got better when Odell left, I think that was Baker just make his natural progression and, dealing with an offense where he didn't have that bona fide true number 1 in Odell anymore to, kind of feel forced to feed. And it helped him grow. But I don't think Odell coming back is going to mess up with anything. Apparently, he's pretty healthy. That knee's looking good. So I like Odell a lot this year. I'm kind of blown away. He's got an ADP of 68 right now. The 27th receiver for Odell Beckham Jr. with Baker Mayfield, who people trust now, with an offensive mind who's not going to absolutely ruin him at coach. I mean, I think Odell's going to have a huge year. Am I saying he's going to be a top 5 guy like most expect him to be before last year? No, but I think he's got serious top 10 potential again this year. So Odell Beckham is a guy who I'm going to be drafting early, according to ADPs, but I'm going to make sure he's on my team because I think he's a bona fide or wide receiver 2 at the minimum this year. And his ADP's a little lower than that. So I'm all over Odell this year. Chris, who's your second sleeper?
I just want to touch on a couple things you guys said.
Yeah, no.
So I want to go to Michael Thomas again. So yeah, wasn't the guy the number 1 receiver 2 years ago, or was that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he set the record for most receptions in the season. So if you're playing PPR,
yep.
Right, and the guy
we know Jameis is going to be feeding him the ball.
Right. Touchdown last year. I find it hard to believe he won't do better this year. Also, he played injured all year. He even said he shouldn't have been playing. He was playing to ring chase for Breeze. So technically, he wasn't even Michael Thomas last year. So I do like that. The two running backs, Michael Thomas as a wide receiver one, you're set up great for the rest of the draft and the rest of the season. I also I'm going to disagree with a couple things too. I'm not a huge fan of AJ Green, just because of the offense that Cliff Kingsbury and the Cardinals run. So it's like short passes. That's not really what AJ Green does, especially at this point in his career. I do think that the ADP, it's worth taking a shot on him for sure. But I mean, he got 100 targets in a pass-heavy offense last year. Granted, Burrow didn't play majority of the season. I do see Green doing way better than he did last year. But I don't know. I have a hard time with AJ Green, but when you're taking a shot that late in the draft, I could easily be wrong. That's prove me wrong because I love AJ Green. He won your championship once. And then who was your first one again, Meerkat?
Number one was Odell Beckham.
And then
Junior.
The second?
I didn't drop the second yet. I was going to let you guys go through, then drop my second because I'm infatuated with my second.
Okay. Yeah, in OBJ, I was just looking at the receivers being drafted around him. I just wanted to ask you a question.
Hit me.
Would you rather have OBJ or Cortland Sutton?
OBJ. That whole Broncos wide receiver room, there's so much talent there, young talent, but there's also so many question marks, not just with Locke, but between injuries with those guys, drops with guys like Judy, stuff like that. So I'm not, that's a bit biased there. I just don't love the Broncos receiver room this year. And so if we're looking, I mean, Jamar Chase being drafted above OBJ, it kind of makes sense, but it pisses me off. Like, why are you taking a rookie above Odell Beckham Jr., who's this proven threat in the league year in and year out, and because he gets injured for half a season, it's just all doom and gloom. And then Chase Claypool's right behind him. And T. Higgins, two guys I like a lot this year, but I don't think should be in the same tier as Odell Beckham Jr. And guys above Odell, I mean, there's some. It's hard to make arguments over some of these guys. Like, I'm sure I can give you an argument for OBJ over Robert Woods this year, or OBJ over Cooper Kupp, one of those two Rams guys. Yeah, Brandon Ayuk. I love Ayuk, but another one kind of like.
That's where I would draw the line. I would draft him over Lamar. I draft him over T. Higgins, but Ayuk I do really like, and I do see that Odell doesn't have a great strength of schedule this year for receivers, so that might have something to do with his ADP. But
the ADP makes sense. Don't get me wrong; it makes sense given the level of talent and the severity of his injury. But it's still, I think he's going to way outperform it. Personally, it's just hard for me to figure out above who exactly right now.
I think.
I also think he's in a much better situation than the Cincinnati receivers. I mean, tell me right now, who's the number one receiver in Cincinnati? The rookie, the guy they took with the first pick of the second round last year, or Tyler Boyd, who took the wide receiver one job from AJ Green?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I like that group, that group of receivers for sure, but just question marks right now.
But in terms of fantasy, you're not going to start all three of them. So
I trust OBJ a hell of a lot more than any of them.
OBJ walked in there day one. He's the starter. Jarvis Landry had the opportunity to show that he could be the guy, and he was a very solid wide receiver too, but he was kind of like that Marvin Jones type of guy. That
he's a great sidekick for OBJ.
Great,
and they're like best friends too. Yeah,
exactly. He's not that guy though. He's not that wide receiver one.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on a few things you guys said, but I actually have two. I'm just going to sneak one more in here before I go.
Go ahead.
I really like Michael Pittman. I think
that's a good one.
Yeah, I think that he reminds me a lot of Robert Woods. I don't know if it's the USC or just their archetype, but they play very, very similar. And I think that with Wentz coming in, I mean, Pittman shined in the playoffs against us, against Trey. I think he was on Trey. Trey was on him, but I really like Pittman. But this one guy that No surprise I'm taking another Bill, but Emmanuel Sanders. I think that his ADP is ridiculous. The people that are being drafted, or the players that are being drafted over him, is like Elijah Moore. I think that Sanders is a brilliant route runner, just like Diggs. And like I was saying with Diggs, you get an inch of separation. Allen's gunning the ball, and if you can catch the ball, you're getting a reception. So I think that he's going to get peppered with targets. He fits the mold of what Brendan Beane and Brian Dable want to do on the offense, is just get open and let Josh sling it in there. So Sanders being drafted, I think, at like 150, 160. You can draft him in the 10th, 11th round. I think that's a no-brainer for me. He could easily outperform Cole Beasley this year, in my opinion. So that is my favorite. Mm-hmm. That's a guy I'm going to draft in every single league, even if I have to reach a little bit.
Yeah, especially with John Brown leaving the roster too. I mean, you have a clear-cut path to being a starter for Emmanuel Sanders, and he's been good. He stepped up for New Orleans last year. I think he was on the Broncos when they won the Super Bowl, right? Back in 2015?
Yeah, Pittsburgh, Broncos, and San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, I mean, he's got a great track record in a good situation. Mm-hmm. Awesome sleeper.
A savvy vet. He's a winner. A guy I'm definitely taking above Beasley this year, too. Agree with you there. And then, since you guys both gave 3, I'm just going to drop. I'm going to go 3, too. I'll drop the third first. The fill-in guy. I'm going with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I had to throw a rookie in here because I take a rookie sleeper every year. He's going into a Lions wide receiver room that is very grim. I mean, it's Tyrell Williams, Rashard Perriman, Quintez Cephas. It's just like he's got a path to being the number 2 receiver opposite Tyrell Williams week 1, I think. And do I hate Goff? Yeah, I kind of do. But he's not the worst quarterback in the league. He can still get the ball to his receivers. He's had receivers have productive fantasy seasons, and the Lions drafting Sewell with Taylor Decker coming off a great year. Their offensive line shored up. Jared Goff's going to be safe, and Brown is a guy who was, insanely talented coming out of high school, highly touted, number 2 receiver in the country, same class as Waddle and Chase, and was above them. Showed not as much as the athlete when you're, at a higher level on the field, but a do-it-all guy. He reminds me kind of like a Robert Woods or a Keelan Cole, where you can put him in the slot and he'll beat up the nickel corner all day long. You can put him outside. He's going to be able to, sometimes burn a guy, but at least win contested catch battles and, be a threat on the perimeter. So I like Amon-Ra St. Brown because of the prospect he is and the situation he's going into. But my number 1 sleeper this year is a guy who I gave out as a sleeper last year. Didn't so pan out, but this year I'm putting all my eggs in his basket. It's Mecole Hardman. Loved Hardman coming after his rookie season last year. Thought he was going to be an absolute weapon. Didn't get as many snaps as I wanted. Still had a decent amount of drops, which was a problem as a rookie. But he's a big play threat. He's a quick twitch, super fast receiver, a lot like the guy who's going to be opposite of him, Tyreek Hill, because right now he's going into their camp as the announced number 2 starter. They are putting confidence and faith in him, trying to hype him up coming into his 3rd season. Now that they lost Sammy, they didn't do anything to replace him. So Hardman's going to get all the looks. He's above Demarcus Robinson right now because they know what Demarcus Robinson can do, but I think they expect a lot more out of Mecole Hardman. So you're putting him with Patrick Mahomes. You're giving him a ton of snaps. He's a guy who is the athlete that can beat you. He gets special teams touchdowns. I love Mecole Hardman coming into this year. If he works on those drops a little more, which, he did from his rookie year till last season, he's going to be a monster. I think his ADP right now is I had it up. I'm sorry.
Receiver 57.
Yeah, it's not great. He is way down the list. Right there with Elijah Moore, rookie, Jalen Reagor with, a sophomore guy coming into the season with a question mark at quarterback. T.Y. Hilton guys above Cole Beasley, your boy Darnell Mooney's above him. I mean, The ADP, another guy that makes sense, I just think is going to outperform it, given his situation, given his talent. He just reminds me of like a Tyreek Hill light. So put him opposite of Tyreek, let that offense run wild with Patrick Mahomes throwing, nutmegs between his legs to his receivers, whatever. I like Mecole Hardman a lot this year. I think he is going to be a guaranteed solid wide receiver too.
You know what's surprising to me? They have Marquise Brown at wide receiver 47 and Mecole Hardman at wide receiver 57. I would think that those would be swapped.
Yeah. The ADP is weird. People don't trust Mecole because of the drops. He's not a huge name. Like rookie year, I think he made Pro Bowl as a returner, maybe. Got his name out there as a rookie, but huge step back last year for a Chiefs team that was in the Super Bowl with Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill getting on the spotlight. He just didn't do enough to stand out. But I love that they're putting the confidence into him this year. They came out and straight up said he's the number 2 receiver heading into camp and preseason right now. So it's his job to lose. He's got the talent to put it home, be an absolute threat.
Yeah, and the stars are lining up for him too because, like you mentioned, Sammy Watkins is gone. They don't really have a great run game, which is rare for an Andy Reid team. And of course, Patrick Mahomes, he's going to be throwing the football. Obviously, Travis Kelce's going to catch some passes too. But the other thing too is when you've got Tyreek, most teams don't have 2 corners with groundbreaking speed. So you're going to have to put your fastest corner on Tyreek, which means there's probably going to be a lot of mismatches for Hardman. And, you said, if he can fix those drops, there's a lot of potential there for him to have some real highlight catches.
Yeah, because he had like a 66% catch rate last year, but like almost a 13% drop rate, which is just like, when he's not catching the ball, it's a bad drop. It's not so much the pass. And that's something you can fix. You really can, And if he's putting in the work, I'm putting all my eggs in his basket after him kind of disappointing me last year. Because last year was the summer of Deontay Johnson and Mecole Hardman. Now it's just the summer of Mecole. He's my boy. Come on, let's do it.
Love it.
All right, so we're all cleared up there on sleepers. You guys said you had some people you wanted to talk about as must avoids. We'll go through that quick if you each got one. Jordan, kick us off with somebody you are just avoiding this year.
I don't know if I'm so much avoiding him as just I don't want to draft him where he is. I hate to go back to Stephon Diggs. For me, I have a hard time putting that first round pick into somebody with only 1 year of dominant performance who's been in the league as long as he has. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are going to take Diggs. I'm sure he pans out. Like I said, I had him on my team last year because I got him in the 7th. But I am a huge Bills fan, but I always have to rein in those homer instincts. Right. And I think this is one of those occasions for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously I hate it, but like I understand it. Chris, who's someone that you want no part of this year, or that you just not going to overdraft?
I'm not going to draft CeeDee Lamb. He's going as the wide receiver 15, going ahead of Godwin. I would draft Robert Woods over him. I would draft a lot of players over him. I mean, I just have a tough schedule. I know they're getting Dak back, but wide receiver 15 for CeeDee Lamb is just too rich for my blood. There's just more upside elsewhere. There's just too many mouths to feed in Dallas for that to pan out, in my opinion, and like to actually pay off.
Yeah, no, I feel that for sure. Dallas, even with Dak coming back, I another guy, I hate him, but I do as a player. I think he's going to be good. He's going to be a great fantasy quarterback if he's healthy. But I understand the settlement. There's so many mouths to feed. Kind of a weird sample size for CD last year, even though he's got the talent. But sophomore slump's a very real thing. One guy who, I'm going to fade this year, not that he's getting drafted insanely high, but wide receiver 37 right now for Will Fuller is just when Will Fuller's not injured, it's because he's doing steroids. He's coming into this season suspended. Devontae Parker is a great receiver, very underrated. Preston Williams is a good receiver. They love Lynn Bowden coming into this year. They invested a ton into Jalen Waddle. They got guys like Jakeem Grant, Albert Wilson, Allen Hurns, Mac Hollins. Like, they have a crazy, crazy deep receiver room. And Will Fuller's the guy who I don't see fitting into that offense too well, especially with Waddle there as wide receiver 3 behind him right now on the depth chart. They play a similar role in Fuller, like I said, a little less versatile. Not the type of, receiver Tua really needs to just take the top off, because you're not seeing Tua throw those bombs. Not that he's not capable. He's just a bit sheltered, a bit safe right now. So Will Fuller is a guy who I want absolutely no part of, and I'm shocked he's being drafted inside the top 50 receivers.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, even the quarterback situation. I mean, Deshaun Watson now is – kind of taboo, but how many months ago, before all the legal stuff came up, you can't compare him to Tua. I mean, they're two completely different quarterbacks. I mean, they give you two totally different things. You're going to a lesser quarterback, even if Tua takes a step forward. Deshaun Watson, healthy with no drama, is a top 5 guy. Tua, I don't see him being a top 5 guy this year. Yeah, then you add in all this extra depth. Yeah, no, I haven't drafted. I don't even draft him at all.
Yeah, that's literally, like, he's 37 right now, and I wouldn't take him in my top 60 receivers if I put a list out right now for fantasy purposes. Not that he's not talented and stuff, just his situation there is awful. It's the worst possible situation for him to be able to be productive. But now that we went through our sleepers, our top guys, our must-avoids, let's just talk about our Bills a little bit to wrap up the show. I'll kick it off to you guys first, but, tell me how you see the top 3 Bills receivers playing out this year in order from a fantasy perspective outside of Diggs. We're all going to assume Diggs is going to be the top fantasy receiver on the Bills, no matter how much Jordan hates him. But still, we'll just do our top 3 outside of Diggs this year. And, if you want to highlight a guy as an actual sleeper or something like Chris did with Sanders, go for it. And we'll kick it off to you first, Chris.
Yeah, so I gave 2 already. So I'm going, my order would be Diggs, Sanders, and Beasley. But, there's a world where Speedy Stevenson, Marquez Stevenson, emerges as the next John Brown for us. So I think that, there's a world where he is like a younger, more energized John Brown, and that would be fun to watch. He's a fun player, and if that were to happen, we would be, singing the shout song a lot.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Stevenson's a weird one because there's people saying if Stevenson and McKenzie are both going to make the roster, they want. I think it's one or the other. I think Stevenson's on a much better team deal right now. Not that McKenzie took not a lot of money to stay here, which I appreciate, and I love Isaiah McKenzie. He's the ultimate Swiss Army knife, but I think Stevenson can kind of replicate his role, and he's younger, faster, and on a longer deal for cheap. So I like the Stevenson pick there. Jordan, give me your top 3 outside of Diggs and someone you're really looking at.
So I actually like McKenzie more than Stevenson. I think that he can be a really solid return man. I think he's gotten more practice now. He's got good hands, and I think that he contract-wise might not be quite as attractive, but I think when you look at his resume, he's accomplished a lot more at the NFL level. He's shown he can do these things, and I think that's got to count for something. But overall, I really like the Bills receiver room because you got a couple guys, obviously Diggs, who I like. I really like Diggs as a Bills fan. I love Diggs. I got to get that out there. I've seen it happen where your first round pick doesn't pan out for you, and it can really, really screw up your season. But one of the things that I think was so great to watch about Buffalo last year is they had several guys that they didn't need to be strong contributors every game, but they could sort of take over a game here and there. We had the Isaiah McKenzie game where he goes off for 3 touchdowns. He's not a Tyreek Hill where you're going to expect that, where that's just the second quarter or whatever quarter was that Tyreek Hill scored like 200 yards or something like that.
Yes, there's nuts.
But you've got Gabriel Davis, who they didn't need him to put up 50 yards a game, but every now and then on a clutch third down, he's putting out a sweet toe drag reception. And then teams are thinking about him, and that opens up Diggs. So I think having all those avenues, I really like where they're at. And yeah, I mean, I got my preferences, but I think this is the best wide receiving room I think I've ever seen out of the Bills in my lifetime. Most of that consisted of the drought when, there wasn't a whole lot going on. But yeah, there's outside of Diggs being the number one guy, I don't really think there's a bad way to slice and dice this wide receiver group. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like we used to have arguments not so long ago about, absolute no-name guys who made a cool catch or two in training camp being, the 6th or 7th receiver. And now we're arguing, not like, like a 5th round rookie or a guy like Hodgins or a guy like McKenzie as possibly not making the roster, which is high talent. You can't deny the level of pedigree, the level of production and savviness out of this wide receiver room right now. Saying that, outside of Diggs, I'm going with, the younger guy, the sophomore here as my number 2 receiver, fantasy-wise and overall for the Bills. It's going to be Gabe Davis. Gabriel. Gabriel, not Gabe. My apologies. But, he wasn't second on the team in yards last year. He was behind Beasley. He was 3rd in yards, 2nd in touchdowns. Showed to be an absolute red zone threat, even though he doesn't have crazy size or anything. I mean, going up and getting balls, toe tapping, throwing DBs off their game. He's so talented. And he was 2nd on the team in snaps for receivers, right behind Diggs, above Beasley. I think that role increases this year. He proves he's the number 2 bona fide guy opposite Diggs. So I love Gabriel Davis this year a lot. I think he's being a little underdrafted, could have sleeper potential of fantasy because I really think Gabriel Davis is going to be like a 850 yard, 8 to 10 touchdown guy this year. No problem, even with the crowded receiver room. And then after that, it's basic, but I'm just going Sanders and Beasley. I think Sanders has a better season than Beasley, but Beasley's role is not going to be gone just because he's an idiot on Twitter. We're not getting into that. But I don't think his weak Twitter game is going to impact that so much, as Sanders is kind of a better fit, I feel like, as our slot guy. Not saying, Beasley had an incredible year last year. He was an all-pro for whatever, but I like those 3 guys. I think they're all going to be fantasy relevant this year, but I like Gabriel Davis being, a step above the vets right now on this team.
Yeah.
Yeah, Davis he's got that deceptively big catch radius. Even if you get an experienced corner that's going to try and push him to the outside, he makes catches for a guy who doesn't always put up a ton of yardage. He makes catches that you would not expect somebody that far down the depth chart to be able to make. He's got a lot of tricks in his toolbox that you don't necessarily expect to see from somebody with that role on the team. Diggs extends out to make a great sideline catch. It's like, all right, well, it's Stephon Diggs. Beasley runs a great route. It's like, all right, well, it's Beasley. But when Gabe Davis, this guy who's not even necessarily a starter, comes out and does these things, there's so many clutch plays and drives that almost ended but continued into a touchdown for a more notable player.
The back-to-back toe drags,
because of a clutch Gabe Davis play in the middle of the field.
It's no surprise that his mentor is Brandon Marshall.
Yeah, he plays a lot like him. That's for sure.
Yeah.
He broke Brandon Marshall's records at UCF, and he's his mentor, so he plays a lot. I mean, it's
yeah.
So yeah, that's a great. Yeah, I love Gabriel. I probably would put him at 4 on the depth chart.
I feel like a lot of people don't realize he was 2nd in that receiver room in snaps last season ahead of Beasley because the yardage production, but. that wraps it up for us today, folks. Thanks for joining in. I mean, I hope we can help you guys a little bit with your fantasy football issues because draft should be coming up. If you haven't drafted already, I mean, if you've drafted already, you must be pretty hardcore, or I don't know, you're kind of wild. Because I like waiting. Honestly, you get the league set up now and stuff, whatever, for sure. But I like waiting to draft until like after the second or third week. Well, now it would be the first or second week of preseason since we're down to 3 games because there are all every year there's always a top or multiple top 30, 50 guys getting injured in meaningless preseason games or at the end of camp. So like seeing how that stuff plays out. But we'll join you next week. I think we're going to be talking running backs, another fun one before we got to get into the nitty gritty stuff. So thanks for joining me, Jordan, Chris, Meerkat here. We're out, folks. Good night now.